The elevator doors opened to the top floor of Aurora Systems, and the air felt pre-pressurized, like a cabin at 35,000 feet. Money had a sound you could only hear if you spent too long around it. The hush of carpet that swallowed footsteps, the whisper of glass walls as they sealed, the polite click of 1,000 decisions that altered other people's lives. Adrian Cole sat at the far end of a table the size of a tennis court, where a 180-degree sweep of San Francisco spilled behind him. The bay, the span of the bridge, the chessboard of traffic below. He didn't look at any of it. His attention was on the numbers that kept him from falling apart. 12.4%, his CFO said, tapping a cell on a deck. If we move now, we capture the vendor and the patents before Horizon can counterbid. Adrian turned a page. Lower the offer by $18 million. Close by Thursday. No tremor. No hesitation. His voice had that flat, stainless edge people mistook for confidence. It wasn't confidence. It was survival. He used to be someone else. He used to laugh at the wrong time and stay up too late to watch foreign films with Maya, who had a talent for spotting beauty where most people saw clutter. She'd point with a paint-stained finger at a crooked street sign or the way fog ribboned through eucalyptus trees and say, "Look, the world is winking." On his 31st birthday, she smudged icing onto his cheek and declared him the most serious human being in California. He had pretended to be offended. They had kissed in the doorway of their first apartment while the oven beeped at a cake that would sink in the middle. That was 12 years and an empire ago. Mr. Cole? The CFO was watching him, waiting for the rest of the order. Adrian blinked. Execute. Next item. The meeting ran like a metronome. Mergers, cash flow, regulatory risk. When the last executive filed out, the room exhaled. He was alone with the glass in the bay and the ache he never acknowledged. His phone lit with a number only 3 people had, and 2 of them never called during business hours. He answered, already frowning. "Mr. Cole, this is Dr. Anna Reyes from St. Francis." The sound changed. It was like hearing the ocean from under it. "There's been an accident," the doctor said. "A collision on the Embarcadero. Your wife, Maya Cole, we tried everything. I'm so sorry." The phone became a wait. The bay doubled and blurred. Somewhere in the building a printer chattered like an impolite bird. Adrian stood very still, as if moving would confirm that time hadn't stopped. On the drive to the hospital, he noticed the oddest things. A kid at a bus stop with a skateboard, a woman in a green coat balancing a bakery box, the way a dog looked up at its owner with absolute trust. He remembered everything and nothing. He signed forms with hands that didn't feel attached to him. He answered gentle questions he wouldn't recall later. The funeral was small. Maya had wanted something light, quiet, unserious, and that cruel word, unserious, echoed in his skull as though it were mocking him. People told him he was strong. Strength felt like frostbite. He disappeared from the world for exactly 24 hours. On the 25th, he walked back into Aurora wearing the same charcoal suit, carrying the same black briefcase, and started building a wall with the only bricks he trusted: tasks. If he could move fast enough, he told himself, the grief would pan and fall behind. A year is long enough to construct a fortress. He counted it. Not a year, but 8,760 hours, and filled as many as possible with work until even his reflections looked tired. His penthouse in Russian Hill turned museum quiet. Everything exactly where the housekeeper left it. The art Maya had painted leaned against a wall in his studio, wrapped in canvas. He told himself he'd hang them when things settled. Things never did. "Mr. Cole, dinner is ready," Louisa said from the doorframe each evening. He learned how to say, "leave it on the counter," without sounding rude. The industry called it a pivot. They said Adrian Cole had found a new gear, that he was, depending on which blog you read, either a visionary or a machine. He closed the visions that bled, bought companies that fit together like teeth, and talked about efficiencies without picturing the people who would pack cardboard boxes under fluorescent lights. Everything he swallowed tasted like salt. The anniversary landed on his calendar like a meteor, March 19th. He cleared the day. No driver. No security. He wanted the world to forget he existed, if only for the length of an afternoon. Gracelight Cemetery sat on a hill where traffic hummed like surf. The grass was still wet from a morning fog. Adrian carried white peonies, Maya's favorites because they're defiant, they explode, and found the stone the way you find your mouth in the dark. Maya Aristocole, she made the quiet ring. He had written that line himself and hated it now for being too small. "Hi," he said, and the syllable broke. "I don't know how to do the rest of this without you." It wasn't a public kind of crying. It was private, feral, a storm that finally reached shore. He knelt, not caring about the damp seeping into his suit, and told the stone everything he'd been rearranging into spreadsheets. When the rain came, a soft silver, he let it. It felt like permission. He didn't know how long he stayed. Long enough for the sky to change its mind. Long enough for his breathing to find a tempo that didn't feel like panic. At some point a crow complained in a cypress, and he almost laughed because Maya had always insisted crows were gossiping. He was standing to leave when he heard whispers, small, urgent ones, carried by the wind the way secrets travel in old buildings. "Don't step on the ants, Jules," a girl said. "I'm not. They're on a mission," another girl answered. They appeared between the rows like bright commas in the gray. Two children in mismatched raincoats, one teal, one orange, with dark curls escaping from knit hats. Each held a fistful of wildflowers, so earnest the stems had bruised in their grip. They stopped at a weathered headstone flecked with lichen and arranged their bouquets like curators. "Granddad liked the yellow ones," the teal coat announced. "Mom says he liked whatever Nana liked," Orange replied. They both nodded, satisfied by this logic. Adrian should have moved on. He told himself to go before they turned and saw a stranger's grief. He did not move. The girl in teal noticed him first. She didn't startle, just studied him with the long, serious gaze children use when they're deciding if you're safe. "You look like your dog ran away," she said finally. "Jules," the other girl hissed, "you can't say that to strangers." "He looks like that," Jules whispered. Then louder, "Are you visiting your person?" "Yes," Adrian said. His voice surprised him by working. "My wife." The second girl, Tess, tilted her head and considered his suit, his soaked sleeves, the peonies scattered like little explosions at his knees. "We're visiting our granddad," she said. "He died on New Year's Day. Mom says grief is like a tide. It goes out so you can breathe, and then it comes back when you forgot to hold on to something." It landed like something Maya might have said, and for a beat he couldn't answer. The girls looked at each other. The twin telegraph that isn't strictly about blood so much as practice. Jules set her jaw the way small, brave people do. "Can we hug?" she asked. 3 words. Small words. The sort that slide under locked doors. Adrian didn't remember deciding to kneel. He was suddenly the height of their kindness, and they walked into his arms as if they'd been meaning to all afternoon. They smelled like rain and crayons and shampoo that promised strawberries but delivered something better, childhood. It wasn't a cinematic moment. Nobody applauded. The crows didn't respectfully flap away. It was ordinary in the way the most important things are. 2 small humans sharing their warmth with a larger one who had been cold too long. He cried again, but it was different. Not drowning. More like the first deep breath after surf flips you and you surface coughing and laughing that you're still here. When he let them go, he did it reluctantly. "Jules." "Tess," a voice called from the lane. A woman in a denim jacket raised a hand. "Stay where I can see you." "Hi, Mom." Tess shouted back, then lowered her voice to Adrian. "We have to go before the ants finish their mission." "Thank you," he said, meaning it with a clarity that almost hurt. "You're welcome," Jules replied, nodding like a minister approving a life choice. Then the 2 of them ran the last few yards to their mother, flowers still clutched like flags. Adrian watched them go, the denim jacket, the messy braid, the way the woman touched both girls at once without really thinking about it. Something tilted inside him, the way a picture frame straightens when someone bumps the wall. He went home with damp cuffs and a feeling he couldn't name. That night, he stood by the studio door and looked at the canvases he hadn't unwrapped. He cut one open, Maya's color. An electric blue she mixed herself, jumped like a live thing. He sat on the floor for a long time, the room smelling like dust and paint and rain. At 6:10 a.m., He called Lena, his chief of staff, who had learned not to be surprised by anything except silence. "I need a favor," he said. "Discreet." "Of course," she said. "What kind of discreet?" "2 girls, maybe 8, maybe 9. Names possibly Jules and Tess. They were at Grace Light Cemetery around 4 p.m. yesterday. They were visiting their grandfather. Their mother has dark hair, denim jacket." He paused, aware of how this sounded. "This is personal." Lena had worked with him long enough to hear the places. He didn't have language. "I'll see what I can do." 41 hours later, she put a slim folder on his desk. "Juliet and Tessa Ramirez," she said, tapping the tab. 8 years old. 3rd grade at Ferry Hill Elementary. Mom is Elena Ramirez, 36, music therapist. Widow. Her husband, Marco, was a firefighter. Died 2 years ago. They live in a duplex on Albatross Lane. She runs a small community choir at the senior center on weekends. Adrian, who could read entire businesses in a glance, took his time with a 1-page bio and the grainy photo Lena had printed from a private group's Facebook album. Elena on a folding chair, guitar in lap, a semicircle of grandmothers around her, the twins at her feet looking. What was the word? At ease. He drove past Ferry Hill at lunch like he was scouting a property. He told himself he was being careful, that you don't just walk into someone's life because they loaned you a moment of grace. But he also didn't drive away. On the playground, Jules and Tess pumped their legs, so high the swing squealed. A woman who was obviously Elena, denim jacket upgraded to a red raincoat, knelt to tie a shoe. She had the kind of competence that made complicated things look simple, redirecting an argument, blotting a skin knee with a napkin that appeared from nowhere, laughing with a cafeteria worker like they were old friends. He had once thought competence looked like a well-run yearly plan. He had forgotten the kind that kept small humans fed and alive and somehow still curious. "Back to the office?" his driver asked. 5 more minutes, Adrian said, as if that would be enough. He rehearsed, of course. He was a person who rehearsed even silences. He tried lines in his head that didn't sound creepy or rich or both. By the time he found Elena again, this time at a park with a view of the bay where geese acted like committees, he had edited his opening sentence to death. "Excuse me," he said, standing far enough away that she could choose to ignore him. "Ms. Ramirez?" Her eyes went alert. She placed herself between him and the girls with a motion so practiced it was almost invisible. "Yes." "My name is Adrian Cole." He saw the flicker, recognition, the kind he never enjoyed. He hurried on. "I accidentally met your daughters at Gracelight 2 days ago. They were visiting their grandfather." The word grandfather softened something in her stance. They were very kind to a stranger. Elena's shoulders eased, but her gaze didn't leave his. "They told me," she said, "about this sad man." He grimaced. "That tracks." "They were worried about you," she added, and it landed like a small, unexpected gift. He surprised himself by laughing, brief and quiet. "They fixed a day I didn't think was fixable." Her mouth made the shape of understanding. "They have good instincts." She looked past him to where the twins were trying to bribe a goose with a goldfish cracker. Their dad, Marco, used to say kindness is the only thing that gets interest. You give it away and somehow you have more. He would have liked to say something wise. What came out was true instead. "I don't know how to be a person by myself," he said, then winced because it was too raw to be offered to a stranger. Elena didn't flinch. "You don't have to say it like you're confessing," she said. "It's just a fact." Like fog at 5 a.m., they watched the girls in amicable silence for a minute. 2, the wind coming off the water, cold enough to be honest. "There's a school concert next week," Elena said finally, with a tone that suggested she was weighing risk and deciding on trust. "The twins class is doing a ridiculous mashup of Here Comes the Sun and some cartoon theme I can't escape. They'd be thrilled if you came." She shrugged. So would the geese, apparently. "I'd like that," Adrian said, and realized he meant in a way he hadn't meant anything in months. He sat in the last row of the Ferry Hill auditorium while 100 parents clutched phones like talismans, and for once he didn't feel like a foreigner on the planet. Jules and Tess spotted him through the stage lights, and their faces performed small sunrises. After, they ran at him like a weather event. You came, Tess announced as though she won a bet. You sang like people who know about tides, he said, and Jules, who was Aiden serious, nodded solemnly. Elena appeared at his elbow, breathless and bright in a dress that probably had pockets. There's a lemonade stand catastrophe backstage, she said with a smile. If you want to skate before we hand you a mop. I haven't earned mopping privileges, he said. Yet. Give it time. The next morning, a courier delivered 2 modest bouquets of peonies to the Ramirez duplex with a note in handwriting that had forgotten how to write for anyone but lawyers. Thank you for loaning me your courage. AC. An hour later, he got a call. You don't need to send flowers, Elena said without hello. But they made the kitchen smell like a nicer life. So thank you. Also, please don't send anything expensive. Her voice gentled. The twins don't need things from you. I know, he said, and realized he actually did. What they need, Elena went on, is someone who shows up when he says he will. People sometimes don't after death is in the picture. He said the easiest hard thing first. I can show up. There are pivot points you only recognize by walking past them. The first Saturday after the concert, Adrian carried a paper sack up the steps to the Ramirez front door. Deli sandwiches, sliced fruit, juice boxes he had asked a teenager in line to recommend. The twins led him to a battered upright piano that sounded like a good memory and played their mashup again, wrong notes and all. He clapped like an audience that had paid top dollar. Do you cook? Elena asked later, eyebrow cocked like she already knew the answer. I can acquire cooks. That's not a skill, she said. That's a budget. In the kitchen, he learned the speed at which garlic goes from perfect to tragic. He learned that lemonade should not be salted. He learned the trembling bravery of laughing in a room where you can see the absent shape of someone who used to stand by the sink. He said Maya's name out loud and didn't die from it. Elena said Marco's and didn't break. When he left that night, the world hadn't changed. The bridge still shouldered traffic. The fog still rehearsed its entrance. But he had an appointment on his calendar that didn't require a deck, and it pulsed like a small, honest lighthouse. On Monday, Adrian walked into a boardroom with too much walnut and too little common sense. His second-in-command, Graham Pike, a man who loved margins and mirrors equally, slid a folder across the table with an air of benevolent conquest. Vellum Manufacturing, Graham said. We can carve it in 3, sell 2, keep the automation patents, and juice earnings by 18%. The street will kiss our shoes. How many people is that? Adrian asked the table. Graham smiled the patient smile of someone explaining gravity. 45,000, but... Adrian closed the folder. No, it made a new kind of silence. The kind that asked, who are you, and what did you do with the man who lives here? We're not buying businesses to break them, because breaking them speeds a quarter. Bring me deals that build. Graham's eyes slid, calculating. Is this because of the community chorus director? It would have been easy to go cold. He didn't. He met the man's gaze and said even, it's because I remembered people build companies. Outside the glass, the bay did what it had always done. Moved. That night, Adrian stood in the studio and unwrapped another canvas. Blue, then orange, then a line Maya had scratched with the blunt end of a brush that said something he suddenly, painfully, profoundly understood. He texted Elena a photo of the unwrapped painting, then hesitated and wrote, Tides. She replied before the typing dots had time to become nerves. Out and back. He typed, deleted, tried again. Thank you for lending me shore. She sent a tiny, ridiculous, perfect reply. Anytime, bring lemons. We'll try not to salt them. Outside, a foghorn sounded like an old friend announcing his presence. Inside, Adrian set an alarm for the morning. Not because the markets opened. Because Jules and Tess had invited him to help deliver wildflowers to a nursing home where Elena's choir rehearsed, and he had no intention of being late. The world hadn't gotten lighter. He had. Just enough to move. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time Adrian reached his apartment. Drops clung to the balcony glass, like stubborn memories, catching the light from the city in little fractured patterns. He set his keys on the counter and pulled the slim folder Lena had given him from his coat pocket. It was thin, barely a dozen pages, but he felt the weight of it in his hand. He sat at the long dining table that hadn't hosted more than a single plate in a year and opened it. Juliet and Tessa Ramirez, 8 years old, 3rd grade at Ferry Hill Elementary. Mother, Elena Ramirez, 36. Music therapist, widow of firefighter Marco Ramirez. They lived in a modest duplex on Albatross Lane, about a 20-minute drive from his place, in a neighborhood where kids still played in the street and front porches doubled as living rooms in the summer. There were a few photographs, candid, unposed, clearly taken at community events. Elena in a denim jacket, laughing with a group of seniors at the center where she volunteered, her guitar resting on her knee. The twins in mismatched rain boots, holding up a paper banner that read, "Thank you, firefighters," in bold, messy letters. Adrian found himself staring longer than necessary the way Elena's hand rested lightly on each daughter's shoulder, fingers curved in that unconscious gesture of protection and belonging. It reminded him of the way Maya used to anchor him in a room, without saying a word. Just a touch, barely there, but enough to remind him where home was. He closed the folder and sat in the quiet. The city outside moved in its usual hurry, but inside, something was shifting, slow, deliberate, like a bridge being built one beam at a time. The next afternoon, he was in his car across from Ferry Hill Elementary before the final bell rang. He told himself it was reconnaissance, that it made sense to observe before approaching. The playground came alive with shouts and the clatter of lunchboxes swinging from small hands. Jules and Tess emerged from the front doors together, scanning the row of waiting parents. Elena followed a moment later, her hair pulled back into a loose braid, tote bag over one shoulder. She knelt to speak to one of the girls, and they both nodded before running toward the bike rack. Adrian noted the way she kept him in her line of sight without hovering. He'd seen corporate leaders with less skill in managing chaos. For 3 days, he returned at dismissal time. Each time, he sat in the car, watching from a distance, telling himself he was just preparing. On the 4th day, he saw them head not for home, but toward a small park a block away. It was late afternoon, the light turning gold at the edges. That was the day he decided to cross the street. Elena was on a bench near the playground, reading a worn paperback. The twins were in the sandbox, building what looked like a castle under siege by an army of plastic dinosaurs. Adrian approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Ms. Ramirez?" he said, keeping his voice low. She looked up, and in the brief moment before recognition, her expression shifted from polite curiosity to guarded awareness. She closed her book and straightened slightly. "Yes. My name is Adrian Cole," he began. This is going to sound unusual, but I met your daughters a few days ago at Gracelight Cemetery. They were visiting their grandfather." Her eyes softened, but the caution didn't fade completely. "They told me about you. The sad man." He gave a rueful half-smile. "That tracks." "They were worried," she said simply. The words landed with more force than he expected. "They helped me," he admitted. "More than I can explain." Elena studied him for a moment, as though deciding whether to believe that. "They have good instincts," she said finally. "Their father had that. He could see when someone needed a hand." There was a beat of silence, filled with the distant sound of children laughing and a dog barking somewhere down the street. "They mentioned the school concert," Adrian said. "I was wondering if I could come, if that's all right." Her gaze held it for a moment longer, then she nodded. "They like that. And I think so would I." The following Thursday, the auditorium at Ferry Hill was packed with folding chairs and the rustle of paper programs. Adrian slipped into a seat near the back, aware of the sideways glances from parents who clearly didn't recognize him as part of the usual crowd. He ignored them, scanning the stage until he spotted the twins in the second row, wearing matching sunflower yellow T-shirts and grins that seemed too big for their faces. When their turn came, Jules announced a song with the gravity of a conductor at Carnegie Hall. "Here Comes the Sun." Tess started the first note a beat late, then caught up quickly, their voices weaving together in a way that was imperfect but entirely theirs. Adrian felt again that loosening in his chest, like a knot coming undone. He didn't realize he was smiling until Jules caught his eye and lit up in return. After performance, the twins bounded down the steps toward him. "You came," Tess said, as though she'd been holding her breath until this moment. "Wouldn't miss it," he said. "You were both amazing. Did you hear the part where we went high?" Jules asked eagerly. "Mom says we sounded like birds." "Better than birds," Adrian said solemnly. Birds can't make people this happy. Elena joined them, her cheeks still flushed from playing guitar with the final act. "Thanks for coming," she said, and her voice held a warmth that hadn't been there in the park. They'd been talking about it all week. On impulse, he said, "Maybe we could all get ice cream sometime. My treat." The twins exchanged a look, then turned to their mother with synchronized pleas. Elena laughed, shaking her head. "We'll see," she said, but there was no rejection in it, just a promise to decide later. 3 days later, they were sitting at a corner table in a small ice cream shop that smelled like sugar and nostalgia. Jules had chocolate, Tess had strawberry, and Adrian had something called honey lavender that he'd chosen because it reminded him of the soap he'd bought at the market. The girls quizzed him relentlessly about his favorite animals, his least favorite vegetables, whether he could whistle, he couldn't, which they found hilarious. Elena watched it all with a quiet smile, stepping in only when Tess nearly knocked over a cone in her enthusiasm. When the cups were empty and the spoons abandoned, they lingered, conversation meandering from music to books to the best way to build a pillow fort. On the walk back to their car, Jules slipped her hand into Adrian's without asking. Tess joined on the other side a moment later, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt anchored that night in his apartment. He stood in front of the canvases, still wrapped in the studio. He unsealed another one, revealing a painting Maya had done of the bay at dusk, water the color of ink, lights winking on like scattered fireflies. He traced the lines she'd painted, the ones that seemed to hum with life even now. The next morning, he called Lena into his office. "I want to set up a meeting with the Harmony Foundation," he said. "That's your philanthropic arm," she reminded him. "You haven't touched it in 2 years." "I'm touching it now," Adrian said. "I have an idea." It wasn't just an idea. It was a first step towards something that might matter in a way quarterly reports never could. And it had started in the rain, with 3 words from 2 girls who didn't know him but had decided to offer him something anyway. The Harmony Foundation's conference room was smaller than any meeting space at Aurora Systems. The chairs did match perfectly, and the long table bore faint scratches from years of use. But Adrian found himself liking the imperfections. They made the room feel lived in. He'd called the meeting with only a day's notice. Lena sat at the end of the table, flanked by 2 program managers and a community outreach coordinator, whose name he forgot almost immediately because he was too focused on the idea in his head. "I want to expand the foundation scope," he began. "Specifically, to create a program for children from single-parent homes. Music lessons, art programs, tutoring, things that build more than just survival." The outreach coordinator, Melanie, leaned forward. "That's a big jump from our current literacy and food security focus." "I know," Adrian said, "but I've seen the way music changes the way kids carry themselves. It's not just about talent. It's about giving them a language for things they can't say." He didn't mention Jules and Tess by name, but they were there in every word. Lena raised an eyebrow. "And where do you see the funding coming from? We've been operating on a modest budget." "I'll seat it myself," Adrian replied, as though moving millions was no more complicated than rearranging furniture. "And I want Elena Ramirez to consult on the program design." There was a pause. "Is that the music therapist you've been visiting?" Lena asked carefully. "Yes," he said simply. The team exchanged glances, but no one pushed back. In the corporate world, people challenged him because there was always something to gain from winning. Here, they seemed to trust that his motives might actually be as straightforward as they sounded. That weekend, Adrian showed up at the Ramirez duplex with a bag of groceries balanced in one arm. Jules answered the door, a smear of flour on her cheek. "Mom's baking," she announced. "It's an experiment." The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and something just on the edge of burning. Elena was pulling a tray from the oven, and Adrian couldn't help but smile at the sight of her, wearing an apron patterned with little guitars. "They might be edible," she said, sliding the tray onto the counter. "Want to risk it?" He did, and they were barely, but that wasn't the point. They ate warm cookies at the kitchen table, while the twins described in intricate detail the plot of a book they were reading. He listened, genuinely interested, asking questions that made them compete to explain better. Afterward, Elena suggested a walk to the park. It was crisp and bright, the kind of day where the light seemed sharper. The twins ran ahead, stopping now and then to collect leaves or point out a squirrel. They've taken to you fast. Elena said once the girls were out of earshot. I'm still getting used to that, Adrian admitted. In my world, people don't trust that quickly. In their world, they don't have time not to, she said. They stopped at a bench near the pond, watching the girls throw bits of bread to the ducks. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet that felt like a conversation by itself. On Monday, the boardroom at Aurora was anything but quiet. The Vellum Manufacturing acquisition is back on the agenda, Graham Pike announced, sliding thick folders toward each director. We've renegotiated terms. Potential earnings increased by 22%. Adrian didn't touch his folder. And the layoffs? 45,000, give or take, Graham said, as if that number were a rounding error. Adrian shook his head. We're not doing it. The air shifted instantly. Excuse me? Graham said, we're not gutting a company that size just to juice our quarter. Find me deals that create jobs, not destroy them. One of the directors cleared his throat. With all due respect, that's not the model that's made us successful. Maybe the model needs to change, Adrian said. Graham leaned back, a smile playing at his lips. Ever since you started spending time with that music therapist and her kids, you've been making decisions with your heart instead of your head. The room went still. Adrian met his gaze evenly. If you think ethics and profitability are mutually exclusive, you're not thinking big enough. He ended the meeting there, but he knew it wasn't over. Graham would circle back. People like him always did. That evening, Adrian skipped the usual post-meeting drinks with investors and drove straight to the Ramirez home. The twins were in the living room, trying to teach each other a clapping game that seemed to involve more laughing than coordination. You look tense, Elena said when she saw him. It's been a day, he admitted. Lucky for you, she said. We have a cure. She handed him a mug of hot chocolate topped with exactly 3 marshmallows. House rules. They spent the next hour on the floor building a Lego city that Jules insisted needed both a bakery and a fire station. Adrian followed their lead, letting the day's sharp edges dull under the hum of domestic chaos. At one point, Tess asked, "Do you have kids?" He shook his head. No, she considered this. You should get some, she said matter-of-factly. Elena gave him an amused look over Tessa's head. He found himself smiling back. A week later, he took them to the city's botanical gardens. The twins darted between exhibits, pointing out plants with names they couldn't pronounce. Elena walked beside him. The conversation easy, about music, about how the girls were doing in school, about nothing and everything. At the tropical pavilion, Jules pressed her hand against the glass of a butterfly enclosure. A pale blue-winged creature landed briefly, and her face lit up. See, she whispered. Sometimes you just have to be still and let them come to you. Adrian glanced at Elena, who was watching her daughter with quiet pride. He thought about what she'd said earlier, that in their world, there wasn't time not to trust, and wondered if maybe that was a lesson he'd needed for a long time. That night, he stood in his studio again, unwrapping another of Maya's paintings. This one was abstract, a riot of colors he used to think was chaotic, but now saw as deliberate, like she'd been telling him something he wasn't ready to hear. He sent a photo to Elena with a single word, perspective. She replied almost immediately, always changing. And for the first time in years, Adrian felt like change was something he wanted to lean into. By the second week of October, the days had shortened enough that the city lights flickered on before Adrian even left the office. Normally, that kind of creeping darkness only made him work longer, but lately, he found himself glancing at the clock around 5, feeling an unfamiliar tug towards something other than the next deal. That Friday, the tug had a name, Taco Night at the Ramirez Duplex. He arrived to find the twins in aprons at Red Sous Chef 1 and Sous Chef 2. Elena was at the counter, chopping cilantro, while Jules grated cheese with exaggerated concentration. You're late, Tess declared, hands on hips. I'm exactly on time, Adrian countered, glancing at the clock. Late is when the guacamole is already made. Jules said, as if this were a universally accepted law. Elena laughed. You've been warned. They cooked together, if you could call it that, Adrian mostly followed instructions, slicing limes and learning the correct ratio of sour cream to hot sauce. When dinner was ready, they sat around the small table, passing bowls and stories. Jules asked about the most dangerous thing Adrian had ever done. He told her about trying to surf in Bali and ending up in the hospital with a sprained ankle. Tess countered with her own dangerous experience, sliding down the tallest slide at the playground without holding on. After dinner, they played a board game Jules insisted on teaching him. The rules were elaborate and suspiciously fluid, changing in her favor whenever she began to lose. By the time he left, the tension from his week had melted into something softer. Monday morning brought it all back. Graham Pike was waiting in his office, a folder already open on his lap. You turned down Vellum. Fine, but we need a win this quarter. Here's a clean target, small enough to absorb without too much noise, big enough to move the numbers. Adrian scanned the summary. And how many jobs does this clean deal eliminate? Maybe 3,000, Graham said with a shrug. Nothing compared to Vellum. We can spin it as modernization. Adrian closed the folder. No. Graham's jaw tightened. You're making this a pattern. The board is starting to ask questions. Then give them answers, Adrian said. Tell them I'm building a company that doesn't eat its own. You keep this up, and they'll decide to find someone who will. It wasn't a threat so much as a reminder of the terrain they were standing on. Adrian didn't flinch. Let them try. That evening, he told Elena about it while they walked the twins home from a piano lesson. They think you've gone soft, she said. I think I've started remembering what people look like on the other side of the spreadsheet. She glanced at him sideways. That's not a bad thing. It is in my world. They stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light. The twins darted ahead to press the button, their laughter echoing off the buildings. Maybe it's time your world changed, Elena said quietly. The following Saturday, Adrian joined them for a trip to the farmer's market. It had rained earlier, and the pavement still smelled faintly of wet leaves. The twins dragged him from stall to stall, making him sample everything from apple cider to goat cheese. At one booth, a vendor was selling handmade birdhouses. Tess picked up a small blue one. It looks like the color in your wife's painting, she said without hesitation. Adrian was startled, not by the observation, but by how easily she said it. He nodded. It does. They bought the birdhouse, and he promised to help them hang it in the yard. Back at the office the next week, Lena intercepted him before his morning coffee. You should see this, she said, handing him a printout. It was an article from a financial blog speculating on the new Adrian Cole. The tone was skeptical, even mocking. Is the once ruthless CEO losing his edge? Sources say his recent refusal of high-profit acquisitions may be tied to a personal relationship. They're fishing, Lena said, but Graham's not denying it when asked. Adrian set the paper down. Let them talk. But later that night, as he helped Jules with her math homework, the thought lingered. How easily people could twist something genuine into a weapon. 2 weeks later, the weapon was drawn. A headline hit the business section. Aurora CEO faces internal backlash over softened strategy. The article cited anonymous insiders claiming his personal life was influencing corporate decisions. It mentioned Elena by name, described her as a local music teacher and widow, and referred to the twins as young daughters from a previous marriage. Elena called him that evening, her voice tight. The girls saw it. Jules asked if we did something wrong. You didn't, Adrian said quickly. This is about me, not you. It's about all of us now, she said, and I need to think about how to protect them. The silence on the line was worse than any boardroom fight he'd ever been in. The next morning, Graham waited for him outside the elevator. The board wants a closed-door session. They're calling it a stability review. Adrian looked him in the eye. You push this. I just gave them the facts, Graham said. They made their own conclusions. As the elevator doors closed, Adrian felt the old instincts stirring, the ones that had built his empire. But now, those instincts had to fight for more than market share. They had to fight for a family that wasn't even his yet, but felt more like home than anything he'd had in years. By the second week of October, the days had shortened enough that the city lights flickered on before Adrian even left the office. Normally, that kind of creeping darkness only made him work longer, but lately, he found himself glancing at the clock around 5, feeling an unfamiliar tug towards something other than the next deal. That Friday, the tug had a name: Taco Night at the Ramirez Duplex. He arrived to find the twins in aprons at Red Sous Chef 1 and Sous Chef 2. Elena was at the counter, chopping cilantro, while Jules grated cheese with exaggerated concentration. "You're late," Tess declared, hands on hips. "I'm exactly on time," Adrian countered, glancing at the clock. "Late is when the guacamole is already made," Jules said, as if this were universally accepted law. Elena laughed. "You've been warned." They cooked together, if you could call it that. Adrian mostly followed instructions, slicing limes and learning the correct ratio of sour cream to hot sauce. When dinner was ready, they sat around the small table, passing bowls and stories. Jules asked about the most dangerous thing Adrian had ever done. He told her about trying to surf in Bali and ending up in the hospital with a sprained ankle. Tess countered with her own dangerous experience, sliding down the tallest slide at the playground without holding on. After dinner, they played a board game Jules insisted on teaching him. The rules were elaborate and suspiciously fluid, changing in her favor whenever she began to lose. By the time he left, the tension from his week had melted into something softer. Monday morning brought it all back. Graham Pike was waiting in his office, a folder already open on his lap. "You turned down Vellum. Fine, but we need a win this quarter. Here's a clean target, small enough to absorb without too much noise, big enough to move the numbers." Adrian scanned the summary. "And how many jobs does this clean deal eliminate?" "Maybe 3,000, Graham said with a shrug. "Nothing compared to Vellum. We can spin it as modernization." Adrian closed the folder. "No." Graham's jaw tightened. "You're making this a pattern. The board is starting to ask questions." "Then give them answers," Adrian said. "Tell them I'm building a company that doesn't eat its own. You keep this up, and they'll decide to find someone who will." It wasn't a threat so much as a reminder of the terrain they were standing on. Adrian didn't flinch. Let them try. That evening, he told Elena about it while they walked the twins home from a piano lesson. "They think you've gone soft," she said. "I think I've started remembering what people look like on the other side of the spreadsheet." She glanced at him sideways. "That's not a bad thing. It is in my world." They stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light. The twins darted ahead to press the button, their laughter echoing off the buildings. "Maybe it's time your world changed," Elena said quietly. The following Saturday, Adrian joined them for a trip to the farmer's market. It had rained earlier, and the pavement still smelled faintly of wet leaves. The twins dragged him from stall to stall, making him sample everything from apple cider to goat cheese. At one booth, a vendor was selling handmade birdhouses. Tess picked up a small blue one. "It looks like the color in your wife's painting," she said without hesitation. Adrian was startled, not by the observation, but by how easily she said it. He nodded. "It does." They bought the birdhouse, and he promised to help them hang it in the yard. Back at the office the next week, Lena intercepted him before his morning coffee. "You should see this," she said, handing him a printout. It was an article from a financial blog speculating on the new Adrian Cole. The tone was skeptical, even mocking. Is the once ruthless CEO losing his edge? Sources say his recent refusal of high-profit acquisitions may be tied to a personal relationship. "They're fishing," Lena said, "but Graham's not denying it when asked." Adrian set the paper down. Let them talk. But later that night, as he helped Jules with her math homework, the thought lingered. How easily people could twist something genuine into a weapon. 2 weeks later, the weapon was drawn. A headline hit the business section. Aurora CEO faces internal backlash over softened strategy. The article cited anonymous insiders claiming his personal life was influencing corporate decisions. It mentioned Elena by name, described her as a local music teacher and widow, and referred to the twins as young daughters from a previous marriage. Elena called him that evening, her voice tight. The girls saw it. Jules asked if we did something wrong. You didn't, Adrian said quickly. This is about me, not you. It's about all of us now, she said. And I need to think about how to protect them. The silence on the line was worse than any boardroom fight he'd ever been in. The next morning, Graham waited for him outside the elevator. The board wants a closed-door session. They're calling it a stability review. Adrian looked him in the eye. You pushed this. I just gave them the facts, Graham said. They made their own conclusions. As the elevator doors closed, Adrian felt the old instincts stirring, the ones that had built his empire. But now, those instincts had to fight for more than market share. They had to fight for a family that wasn't even his yet, but felt more like home than anything he'd had in years. The Monday after the school fair dawned gray, a flat light over the city that made everything look two-dimensional. Adrian had barely stepped into his office when Lena was at his door, holding a folder tight enough to crease the edges. You're going to want to see this, she said. Inside was a printed thread from an industry insider forum. It was couched in careful language, but the implication was unmistakable. Adrian's personal life was affecting Aurora's corporate direction. It referenced questionable philanthropy spending and conflict of interest involving personal acquaintances. Source. Adrian asked. Anonymous, Lena said, but the language is pure Graham Pike. He's been laying this groundwork for weeks. Adrian closed the folder. Get me everything you can on his communications. Emails, calls, off-site meetings. I don't care if you have to pull server logs. Quietly. Lena nodded once. Understood. That evening, he drove to the Ramirez home, needing the antidote their company always seemed to provide. The twins were sprawled on the living room floor, working on a puzzle that appeared to have more sky pieces than anything else. We saved the hardest part for you, Jules said without looking up. Lucky me, Adrian said, dropping onto the floor beside them. Elena emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. I made lasagna. Enough for an army. Dinner was easy. The twins argued good-naturedly about whose turn it was to choose the Friday night movie. Elena told a story about her choir group accidentally double-booking with a bingo night at the senior center. Adrian found himself laughing so much his ribs ached. Later, when the girls were in bed, Elena handed him a mug of tea, and they sat at the table. You look tired, she said. I am, he admitted. The board is getting restless. Graham's feeding them half-truths to make it worse. What happens if they believe him? They could push me out of CO. Her eyes searched his. And if they do? I'd still be me, he said. I'd still have the foundation. And he hesitated, the word hanging between them. You. She didn't look away. You'd still have us, she said quietly. The next day, Lena delivered the first real proof, an email from Graham to a rival executive, discussing Aurora's internal deliberations on a sensitive deal. It wasn't enough for legal action yet, but it was a crack in the armor. Adrian called Graham into his office. You've been busy, he said, sliding a printed copy of the email across the desk. Graham glanced at it, then back at him with a bland expression. You're reaching. I'm patient, Adrian replied. But don't mistake that for inaction. I built this company knowing every angle of every move. I know what you're doing. Stop now or you'll regret it. Graham smirked. You're not the man you used to be, Adrian. And sooner or later, that's going to be your undoing. Maybe, Adrian said, but at least I'll still be able to look in the mirror. That weekend, Adrian took Elena and the twins to the coast. It was cool and windy, the kind of day where the ocean looked like steel under a pale sky. The twins ran along the edge of the surf, squealing when the waves chased them. They needed this, Elena said, pulling her jacket tighter. So did I, Adrian admitted. They walked for a while in companionable silence. Then Elena said, I know you're fighting for your company, but I don't want you to lose yourself in the fight. He stopped, looking out at the horizon. Maybe that's the point. Maybe I need to lose the part of me that built a company by tearing other people's apart. She reached for his hand, then do it for the right reasons, not just to beat him. Back in the city, the tension escalated. Graham began rallying certain board members to his side, whispering about stability and protecting shareholder value. Rumors swirled through the office corridors, and Adrian could feel the shift in how some executives looked at him, calculating, waiting. One night, after another long day, he stopped by the Ramirez home unannounced. Elena opened the door, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, but I didn't want to be anywhere else tonight." The twins barreled into him for hugs, and just like that, the noise of the day faded a little. Over dinner, Tess asked, "If you lose your job, will you still come over?" "Of course," Adrian said immediately. "That's not going to change." Jules nodded as if satisfied. "Good, because we're starting a new puzzle tomorrow, and you're on sky duty again." Elena's smile across the table was small but steady, and in that moment, Adrian knew exactly why he was willing to risk everything. The summons for the emergency board meeting came on a Wednesday afternoon. No agenda, just a time and place. That alone told Adrian exactly who was behind it. When he walked into the boardroom the next morning, the air was already charged. All 12 directors were present, plus Graham, seated directly across from the head chair, like a prosecutor waiting to make his case. Patricia Naylor opened the meeting. "We've convened today to address concerns about the company's leadership and direction under Mr. Cole." Graham didn't wait to be invited. Over the past 6 months, Adrian has rejected 3 high-value acquisitions, redirected hundreds of millions into personal philanthropic projects, and allowed his personal relationships to influence corporate decision-making. This pattern represents a serious threat to shareholder value. Adrian listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Graham finally stopped, he reached for the remote and brought the wall screen to life. "I've heard the rumors," Adrian said calmly, "and I've traced their source." The first slide showed a chain of emails, Grams, complete with timestamps, sent to a competing firm. The subject lines made the implications clear: confidential R&D plans, acquisition targets, internal strategy discussions. "This," Adrian said, "is corporate espionage, leaking proprietary information to a direct competitor in violation of your fiduciary duty." Murmurs broke out around the table. Graham's jaw tightened, but he tried for a dismissive smile. "Those are taken out of context." Adrian clicked to the next slide. Audio recordings of Graham's voice, taken from a meeting with 2 rival executives. The words were unmistakable. "He's distracted, vulnerable. We can use that to our advantage." Silence dropped like a stone. "I could take this to federal investigators today," Adrian said. "Or I can let you resign quietly with a severance package that will make you very comfortable. Your choice." Graham's smirk evaporated. He glanced at Patricia, but she was already leaning back, her expression cold. "You have until the end of the day," Adrian finished. The meeting adjourned. By the time Adrian returned to his office, Lena was waiting. "That was surgical," she said. "It's not over," he replied. "He'll take the deal, but he'll leak one last story on his way out. That's who he is." She hesitated. "You should also know, the media started poking into Elena's past. Not in a malicious way yet, but they're circling." Adrian's jaw clenched. "Keep me informed. I don't want her blindsided." That night, he went to Albatross Lane. Elena answered the door, phone in hand, a faint crease between her brows. "Reporters called my school today," she said before he could speak. "They wanted to know if I'm influencing corporate strategy." The twins were in the living room, so Adrian kept his voice low. "I'm sorry. This is Graham's last shot at damage." I told him no comment, but the girls heard me on the phone. They're asking questions. "We'll get ahead of it," Adrian said. "I'll make a statement." She shook her head. "No, that'll just make it bigger. I can handle this." But he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her voice tightened on handle. Over the weekend, the 3 of them, 4 counting Adrian, went to the park. Jules and Tess were chasing each other in the grass when a woman with a camera approached. "Mr. Cole, mind if I ask?" Adrian stepped between her and the twins instantly. "No comment. And don't photograph the children." The woman backed off, but the damage was done. Elena's face was pale. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she said as they walked back to the car. "I can fix this," Adrian told her. "Can you?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp. "Because every time you go after Graham or the board, the fallout lands here. On them." He didn't have an answer that would satisfy either of them. On Monday morning, Graham's resignation went public. The press release was clean, mutual, polished. But tabloid site ran a different headline. Aurora CEO's romance with single mom ends rival's career. It was accompanied by grainy photos from the park. By the time Adrian reached Elena's that evening, she was on the porch, arms crossed. "The girls had a rough day," she said. "Some parents at school are saying things. They don't understand, but they feel it. I'll make it stop," he promised. She looked at him for a long moment. "I believe you want to. I'm not sure you can." It was the first time she'd sounded like she doubted him, and it hit harder than anything Graham had thrown his way. That night, alone in his apartment, Adrian stood in front of one of Maya's paintings. It was of a storm breaking over the ocean, sunlight knifing through the clouds. He'd thought the light was the point. Now he wasn't so sure. Maybe it was the moment before the light, when everything was still in question, when you had to decide whether to wait for it or make it yourself. And as much as he hated the thought, he realized he might have to step back from Elena and the twins, at least publicly, if he was going to protect them. The idea felt like tearing down a bridge he'd only just built. It had been 3 days since Adrian last saw Elena or the twins. Not because he didn't want to, but because he'd told himself he shouldn't. The decision had felt almost noble in his head. Step back, give them room, let the media storm lose interest. In practice, it felt like waking up in an empty house and staying there, even when you had somewhere better to be. He kept himself busy. At least, that was a lie he told. Meetings filled his calendar, but his attention wandered. During a quarterly strategy review, one of his VPs noticed and asked if he was unwell. Adrian waved it off, but the truth was harder to shake. He was unwell, just not in a way anyone in that room would understand. On Thursday afternoon, Lena came into his office with her usual efficiency, but her expression was softer than usual. "I've been in touch with Elena," she said, surprising him. His pen froze over the contract he was pretending to read. "You what?" She called the foundation about the youth program. Wanted to know if the start date was still on track. Adrian set the pen down. "And she's worried about you," Lena said, even if she's not saying it directly. He looked out the window at the city. "Worried isn't the same as wanting me around." "No," Lena agreed, "but it's closer than you think." That weekend, Adrian drove to the coast alone. The weather was rougher than their last visit. Wind tearing at his coat. Waves slamming the shore like they had a score to settle. He walked for an hour without seeing another person. Somewhere in the roar of the surf, the decision came to him. If stepping back was the only way to protect him for now, he'd do it. But he wouldn't disappear. He'd put his energy into the foundation, build something so bulletproof and public that no one could twist it into a liability. And when the time was right, he'd come back, not just as a man who cared for them, but as a man who could shield them from anything. The following week, he threw himself into the foundation project. The music and arts program took shape quickly under Elena's initial framework. Adrian hired additional staff, secured long-term funding, and arranged for a downtown space that could be converted into classrooms and studios. Lena watched him work and finally said, "You're running this like you used to run acquisitions." "That's because it is one," Adrian replied. "Only this time, the asset is hope." Meanwhile, Elena kept her distance too. She sent the occasional text, updates about the program, a photo of Jules and Tess holding up papier-mâché planets from the science fair. But there were no invitations to dinner, no casual drop-ins. One night, she called. "I heard about the space downtown," she said. "It's going to be good," he told her. "Better than good." There was a pause. "The girls miss you." His throat tightened. "I miss them, too. They don't understand why you're not around." "I'm trying to keep them out of the crossfire," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "But sometimes protecting someone means letting them decide if they want to risk." Before he could answer, She said goodnight and hung up. 2 days later, Adrian was in the new building, walking through the half-finished rooms with the architect, when his phone buzzed. A text from Elena. Can you come to the school? Now. He didn't think, just went. When he arrived, Elena was in the principal's office with Tess, who sat stiffly in her chair, eyes shiny. Jules was beside her, glaring at the floor. What happened? Adrian asked. Some older kids were making fun of Tess about the article. Elena said. Jules stepped in. It got physical. The principal cleared his throat. It's been handled, but perhaps this is a good time to consider how public attention is affecting them. Adrian kept his voice even. We are considering it. Every day. Outside, Tess clung to him without a word. Jules muttered, they were asking for it. On the drive home, Elena didn't speak until they reached a red light. This is exactly what you were trying to avoid. Yes, Adrian said, and it still found them. That night, he didn't go back to his apartment. He stayed for dinner, helped with homework, and read Tessa's favorite story twice because she asked. When the girls were asleep, Elena came into the kitchen. I don't know if there's a right way to do this, she said. There's only our way, Adrian replied, and I'd rather face it together. She didn't answer right away, but when she did, it was enough. Then, don't disappear again. By Monday morning, Adrian had a new resolve. Graham was gone, but the board was still watching. If he was going to keep both the company and the people he cared about, he needed to make Aurora unassailable, not through fear, but through undeniable success. And if that meant rewriting the rules of how the game was played, so be it. The storm wasn't over. But maybe, just maybe, the tide was starting to turn. The first thing Adrian did Monday morning was call a meeting. Not the kind where VPs brought sanitized reports, but one with the real decision-makers. By 10 a.m., the top 8 executives of Aurora Systems were seated around a conference table, curious and cautious. I'm changing the rules, Adrian began without preamble. Aurora isn't going to grow by tearing other companies apart anymore. We're going to build, create partnerships, invest in innovation, develop markets instead of gutting them. One executive frowned. You're talking about joint ventures, not acquisitions? I'm talking about strategic alliances, Adrian said. We share risk, share reward, and in the process, create actual value. And we focus on industries that improve lives, renewable energy, medtech, education tech. The market is moving that way. We're going to lead it. Someone at the far end asked the question he'd been waiting for. And the board, they'll fall in line when they see the returns, Adrian replied. And they will. This isn't charity. It's just not predatory. The first target was a mid-sized renewable energy company developing modular solar panels for low-income housing. Instead of buying them out and streamlining their workforce into unemployment, Adrian proposed a co-ownership model. Aurora would provide capital and logistics. The partner company would keep its leadership and staff. The projections were strong, but the cultural shift was even stronger. Word began to spread inside Aurora. The CEO was doing things differently. Some employees were wary, others quietly enthusiastic. Lena caught up with him after a strategy session. You know, this could work, she said, if the returns come in fast enough to shut up the skeptics. They will, Adrian said, and if they don't, I'll make sure they do. That Friday, he picked up Jules and Tess from school. They ran toward him across the playground, Tess waving a drawing she'd made of a huge yellow sun over a small blue house. It's our house, she explained breathlessly. And that's you bringing tacos. Jules added, we put on the fridge already. Elena met them at the car, smiling. You've been promoted to delivery service. Best promotion I've had, Adrian said. Dinner that night was easy, full of small, ordinary moments that felt anything but ordinary to him. Jules insisted on telling him about her science project in excruciating detail. Tess tried to convince him to join her soccer team as team boss. And Elena kept giving him that quiet, sidelong look that meant more than words. After the girls were in bed, they stood in the kitchen with coffee mugs in hand. They're happy you're here, Elena said. I'm happy I'm here, he replied. She hesitated. Then maybe it's time to stop tiptoeing. If you're part of this family, you're part of it, publicly. It was both an invitation, and a warning. He knew what stepping into the light meant, but he also knew he was done hiding. The next week, Elena and the twins joined him at a charity gala for the Harmony Foundation. It wasn't a press stunt. They were there because a new arts program was officially launching, and Elena was the architect of its curriculum. She looked stunning in a simple navy dress, the twins in matching white cardigans. As they walked in together, camera flashes popped, and Adrian felt a collective shift in the room. For years, he'd been photographed with investors, politicians, models, never with people who actually mattered to him. The evening went well until a reporter cornered them near the dessert table. "Mr. Cole, is it true you've changed Aurora's acquisition policy because of your relationship?" Adrian didn't flinch. "It's true I've changed Aurora's acquisition policy because it was the right thing to do. My relationship has made me a better leader, and I won't apologize for that." The quote hit the news within the hour. Half the coverage praised him for integrity. The other half accused him of weakness. By Monday, the stock had dipped 3%. The board wasn't panicking yet, but investors were calling. Adrian took every call himself, repeating the same line. Long-term value is built on long-term thinking. That night, he told Elena about the dip. "Are you in trouble?" she asked. "Not yet," he said. "But the next 2 quarters will decide everything." She studied him for a moment. "Then we make them count." It was the "we" that stuck with him. The solar panel partnership launched ahead of schedule, and orders came in faster than forecast. Within 6 weeks, the stock not only recovered but hit a new high. Adrian presented the results to the board with the faintest hint of satisfaction. But even as he walked out of the boardroom to a rare round of applause, Lena was waiting with her tablet. "You should see this," she said. On the screen was a headline from a business gossip site. "Aurora CEO's family life becomes company risk factor." The accompanying photo was of Elena and the twins leaving the gala, a red circle drawn around Tessa's face, as if she were some scandalous clue. Adrian's satisfaction evaporated. "This isn't a stop, is it?" he asked. Lena shook her head. "Not unless you make it." That night, standing on Elena's porch after the girls had gone to bed, he said, "We need to decide how public we're willing to be." She met his eyes. "We already decided. We're not hiding." He nodded slowly. "Then I need to change the way the game is played. Not just at Aurora, everywhere." "Sounds like a war," she said softly. "It is," he admitted. "And this time it's not just business." The next morning, Adrian was in his office before sunrise. The city outside was still half asleep, the streets quiet except for the occasional taxi. He stood by the window, coffee cooling in his hand, replaying Elena's words from the night before. "We're not hiding," if they were going to be public. Then he had to control the narrative. Letting the tabloids and gossip blogs shape the story was no longer an option. By 8 a.m., his communications team was in the conference room. "We're going to take this head on," Adrian said. "No denials, no evasions. We'll tell our story on our terms." One of the PR leads frowned. "You mean acknowledge the relationship?" "I mean feature it," Adrian replied. "We'll tie it to the foundation, to the changes we're making at Aurora, to the idea that leadership doesn't have to be ruthless to be effective." The team exchanged wary glances. This wasn't the usual defensive play. It was offense. The plan moved fast. Within a week, Adrian and Elena sat side by side for an exclusive interview with a respected business journalist, someone known for fair coverage, not sensationalism. They spoke about the arts program, about the solar partnership, about creating a corporate culture that valued people as much as profit. Adrian didn't shy away from the personal questions. "I've spent most of my career believing that walls keep you safe," he said during the interview. "But the truth is, walls also keep out the things that make life worth living." Elena and her daughters reminded me of that. Elena, poised and genuine, added, "We didn't change him. He changed himself. We just gave him a reason." When the piece aired, the reaction was split, predictably. Half the audience saw a man in love and a company with heart. The other half saw a CEO distracted by domesticity. The stock wobbled but didn't crash. The board grumbled but didn't move against him. Still, the pushback came from another direction. A hedge fund that held a significant stake in Aurora began buying up more shares, clearly positioning for a hostile takeover. Lena brought in the report late one evening. If they get to 20%, they can force a leadership vote. How close are they? 17 and climbing. Adrian leaned back, thinking fast. We need allies, long-term investors who believe in the direction we're taking. And we need them now. The next 2 weeks were a blur of calls, private meetings, and discreet dinners. Adrian courted pension fund managers, socially responsible investment groups, even rival CEOs who had no love for the hedge fund's tactics. All the while, he tried to keep life normal with Elena and the twins. He took them to a school play, helped Jules build a model bridge for a class project, sat on the floor to braid Tessa's hair while she explained the plot of her favorite cartoon. But even those moments weren't untouched. At the school event, he caught 2 parents whispering behind their programs. At the grocery store, a stranger snapped a photo of him reaching for a carton of milk with Tess perched on his hip. Elena saw the photo online that night. "They're turning us into a spectacle," she said, more tired than angry. "I'll shut it down," Adrian promised. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A tabloid published a front-page investigation into Elena's past, dredging up details about her late husband's medical bills and implying she was financially dependent on Adrian. It was a line they crossed that flipped a switch in him. He called a press conference for the next morning. Cameras filled the atrium at Aurora's headquarters. "My personal life has been the subject of speculation," he began, voice steady. "I'm not here to deny it. I'm here to say that Elena Ramirez and her daughters are part of my family. They are not a liability. They are my strength. And if anyone believes that caring about people makes me a weaker leader, they're welcome to bet against me. They'll lose." The clip went viral within hours. Support poured in from unexpected places. Employees, former rivals, even a few hardened investors who admired the defiance. But the hedge fund didn't back down. Instead, they accelerated their buying. The 20% threshold was now only a week away. One night, after the twins had gone to bed, Adrian sat at Elena's kitchen table with his laptop, spreadsheets open, calls buzzing through his phone. "You're fighting so hard," Elena said quietly, setting a mug of coffee beside him. "I have to," he said. "If they take the company, everything we built, everything we're trying to build, goes with it." She touched his arm. "Just remember, you're not alone in this fight. But if you burn yourself out, you won't be able to protect any of it." Her words lodged somewhere deep. He realized he'd been so focused on defending the fortress that he hadn't stopped to think about what it felt like to live inside it. The next morning, he made a decision. The battle for Aurora would go on, but he'd fight it differently. He'd bring in allies not just from finance, but from the very communities Aurora's new direction aimed to help. It would be riskier, messier, and more public than anything he'd done before. But it might just work. And if it did, it wouldn't just save the company. It would prove, once and for all, that he could protect the people he loved without hiding them. The war was far from over. But for the first time, Adrian felt like he was fighting on his own terms. By Tuesday morning, Adrian's new plan was in motion. Aurora's boardroom was filled not with the usual investors in suits, but a diverse mix of leaders, directors from nonprofits, heads of renewable energy startups, educational innovators, even a few community organizers. These were the people Aurora had partnered with since Adrian shifted the company's focus, and now they were the ones who could help save it. "I didn't bring you here to talk about charity," Adrian began. "I brought you here because we've built something that works, real partnerships, real value, and it's under threat from a hedge fund that sees only quarterly returns. I need your voices." Publicly, there was a moment of silence. Then Malia Santos, head of the modular solar panel company, leaned forward. "You stood by us when others wanted to strip us for parts. If they come for you, they come for all of us. I'm in." One by one, the others echoed her. By the end of the meeting, a coalition had formed, an unlikely alliance that spanned industries but shared one belief: that Aurora's new model was worth defending. The campaign launched within days. Opinion pieces appeared in major newspapers, signed by leaders Adrian had supported. Videos circulated online showing tangible impacts of Aurora's projects. Schools with new science labs, neighborhoods powered by affordable solar, young artists in newly opened studios. The message was clear. Adrian Cole's leadership wasn't a risk. It was a model for the future. The hedge fund tried to counter with its own PR offensive, painting him as an idealist who didn't understand market realities. But their talking points felt cold next to images of children cutting ribbons at new community centers. At home, Elena noticed a shift. People at the school are starting to say good things again, she told him one evening as they cooked dinner together. It's like they suddenly remembered you're more than a headline. I'll take it, Adrian said, smiling faintly. The twins bounded into the kitchen then, each carrying a crumpled flyer. Dad, Adrian, they wanted to come to career day. Jules announced. Yeah, Tess added, you can tell everyone you make robots or something. He looked at Elena over their heads, and she gave a tiny shrug. Guess you're booked. Career day was chaos in the best way. Adrian stood in front of a room full of fourth graders, talking about technology, leadership, and how to make the world better without breaking it first. Jules and Tess beamed from the front row. Afterwards, Elena caught him lingering by the classroom door, watching the twins pack their backpacks. You looked like you belonged there, she said. Maybe I did, he replied softly. But outside that bubble, the fight was intensifying. The hedge fund was at 19.4% ownership, 0.5% away from triggering the takeover clause. Lena came into his office late one night with an idea. What if we turn this into a shareholder referendum? We rally enough votes in advance to block any motion to remove you, publicly. It's risky, Adrian said. If we lose, I'm done. If we do nothing, you're done anyway, she replied. He called Elena that night. If this works, we'll win more than just the company. If it doesn't, we'll still have what matters, she finished for him. Her faith steadied him more than he admitted. The referendum campaign became a full-court press. Adrian personally called dozens of institutional investors, meeting them in person when possible. He showed them numbers, yes, but he also showed them the stories. One evening, he took a group of skeptical investors to the downtown art center. They watched kids painting, sculpting, and recording music in state-of-the-art studios. This is what your investment builds, Adrian told them. And it pays back in more ways than quarterly reports can measure. Some left unconvinced, but others stayed after, asking how they could support the program. At the same time, Elena was fighting her own battles. She spoke at community events, appeared in interviews about the arts program, and even agreed to a joint segment with Adrian on a morning show, something she'd sworn she'd never do. They're going to dig into everything, Adrian warned beforehand. They already have, she said. Might as well give them the real story. When the segment aired, it was warm, human, and disarming. Viewers saw not a scandal, but a family, one that happened to be at the center of a corporate war. 3 days before the shareholder vote, Lena burst into his office with breaking news. The hedge fund had plateaued at 19.6%. They're stuck, she said. We've got just enough commitments to block them. But if anyone flips, they won't, Adrian said. But he knew it was still too close. That night, he didn't go home. He went to Albatross Lane, where Elena was helping the twins with a papier-mâché volcano. Need another pair of hands? He asked. Only if you don't mind getting glue on your shirt. Jules said. He did mind, but he stayed anyway. As the vote approached, Adrian realized something unexpected. The war for Aurora had brought him closer to Elena and the girls, not driven them apart. They weren't just part of his life now. They were his anchor, and whatever happened in that boardroom, he wasn't going to let them go. The morning of the shareholder vote broke clear and cold, a sharp winter light spilling across the city. Adrian was awake long before his alarm, staring at the ceiling and listening to the quiet hum of his apartment. By 8 o'clock, he was in the car with Lena, heading toward Aurora's headquarters. Neither spoke much, the weight of the day pressing on both of them, a silent acknowledgement that everything they fought for over the past months came down to the next few hours. You've got the numbers, Lena said finally. If no one flips, you win. And if someone flips? Adrian asked. She didn't answer. The boardroom was already full when Adrian walked in. Directors sat in a half circle, folders and tablets in front of them, expressions carefully neutral. Representatives from major shareholders filled the gallery seats along the back wall. The hedge funds delegation was there too. 3 sharp-suited men with the kind of confidence that came from betting against people and usually winning. Patricia Naylor, chair of the board, opened the meeting. We're here to vote on the motion to remove Adrian Cole as Chief Executive Officer of Aurora Systems, effective immediately, and to install a temporary management committee. The words landed like stones, but Adrian didn't flinch. When Patricia invited him to make a statement before the vote, he stood. I could talk numbers, he began. Our revenue growth over the past 2 quarters, the stock's recovery after the solar partnership, the uptick in brand value. But you've all seen the reports. So instead, I'll talk about what we're building. Not just a profitable company, but a sustainable one that creates value for its shareholders and its stakeholders, our employees, our partners, our communities. The people trying to take control today don't care about any of that. They see Aurora as a prize to strip for parts. I see it as a legacy worth protecting, and I'll fight for it, with or without this title. He sat down to a murmur of voices, some skeptical, some approving. The voting began. One by one, the shareholder representatives cast their ballots. Some votes came quickly, others after long pauses that made Adrian's pulse climb. When it was over, Patricia reviewed the tally. The motion fails. Adrian Cole will remain CEO of Aurora Systems. A rush of air left his lungs before he even realized he'd been holding it. Lena's hand brushed his arm in a rare gesture of quiet triumph. Across the table, the hedge fund's lead representative's jaw tightened. They'd lost by less than 2%. After the meeting, Adrian stepped into the hallway and pulled out his phone. He called Elena. We won, he said simply. She exhaled, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Then come over. The girls made a cake. It's lopsided, but it's celebratory. When he arrived at Albatross Lane that evening, the twins practically tackled him at the door. Did you beat the bad guys? Jules demanded. I did, he said, lifting her into the air. Tess grinned. Does that mean you can come to our soccer game on Saturday? It means I wouldn't miss it for the world. Elena watched from the kitchen doorway, her expression soft. You look lighter. I am, he admitted, for the first time in months. They ate the cake, which was indeed lopsided, and played a board game that dissolved into laughter and good-natured cheating. Later, after the girls were in bed, Adrian and Elena sat on the porch with mugs of tea. You know this isn't the end, she said. They'll try again in some other way. I know, he replied, but now I've got something they can't take away. What's that? You, he said simply. And, 2 days later, Adrian stood in the New Arts Center downtown for its official opening. The space was bright and alive, walls covered in student artwork, the sound of music drifting from one of the studios. Elena was there, talking to a group of parents. The twins darted between rooms, showing off their favorite corners. When it was his turn to speak, Adrian looked out at the crowd. This center isn't just about art, he said. It's about possibility, about creating a place where talent meets opportunity. And it's proof that business can do more than make money. It can make a difference. He caught Elena's gaze in the crowd, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like both halves of his life, public and private, were finally aligned. The war for Aurora had been won, at least for now, but the real victory was standing right there in front of him. It had been 2 weeks since the shareholder vote, and the air around Aurora felt different. The board had grown quieter. The press had shifted to fresher scandals, and the hedge fund had turned its attention elsewhere. Adrian had almost begun to believe in the idea of stability. Then the call came. It was from Senator Martin Hale, a veteran in Washington with a reputation for building bipartisan coalitions. Adrian had met him once at a charity event years ago, but they'd never spoken at length. I won't waste your time, Hale said. I'm forming an economic council to advise on national innovation policy. It's private sector heavy, and we need someone with your vision. You'd be working directly with my office, and eventually If you're willing, this could lead to a cabinet appointment. Adrian leaned back in his chair. That's a long way from running a tech company. It's a way to influence how the entire country approaches business, sustainability, education. Hale said, what you've done at Aurora. We need that thinking on a national scale. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he told Hale he'd think about it and hung up. The rest of the day, his focus kept slipping. The offer wasn't just flattering. It was a challenge. The kind of challenge his old self would have jumped at without hesitation. That night, he drove to Albatross Lane. Elena was in the kitchen, the smell of roasted chicken filling the air. The twins were sprawled on the living room floor, working on a puzzle. You look like you've been thinking too much, Elena said as she poured him a glass of wine. I got an offer, he told her. An economic council in D.C. could lead to a government position. Her eyebrows rose. That's huge. It's also 3,000 miles away. The twins overheard. Are we moving? Tess asked, eyes wide. No, Adrian said quickly. At least, not unless it's something we all want. Over dinner, Elena listened while he laid out the details. It's not just policy, he said. It's a chance to shape the future on a scale bigger than any company could. And what happens to Aurora? She asked. I could stay on as CEO for now. The council meets quarterly, but it became a cabinet role. You'd be gone most of the time, she finished. He didn't deny it. The next day, Lena cornered him after a morning meeting. You're thinking about it, she said. I'd be an idiot not to. You'd also be an idiot to say yes without considering what it does to the life you just built, Lena replied. You fought like hell to get here. Don't throw it away because you missed the thrill of starting over. He didn't answer. That weekend, Adrian took the twins to the Science Museum while Elena attended a meeting at the Art Center. As they wandered through the exhibits, Jules tugged his sleeve. Would you have to wear a suit all the time if you worked for the government? She asked. Probably, he said. That sounds boring, Tess declared. You should stay here and come to more soccer games. He laughed, but later, as they ate lunch in a museum cafe, their words stayed with him. On Monday, he called Senator Hale back, not to give an answer, but to ask for time. Hale agreed, but warned that the council was moving forward, and they couldn't hold the spot forever. That night, Adrian sat with Elena on the porch after the twins were in bed. I don't want to lose what we have, he said, but I don't want to look back and wonder if I could have done more. She was quiet for a moment. The question isn't what you could do. It's what you're willing to give up to do it. He looked at her, at the warm light spilling from the windows behind her, at the faint sound of the girls' laughter upstairs. And he realized that, for the first time in his life, the choice wasn't just about ambition. It was about belonging. The week after Adrian's porch conversation with Elena was a blur of split focus. Half of him was at Aurora, guiding new projects and cementing the partnerships that had weathered the shareholder fight. The other half was in Washington, at least in his mind, mapping out what it would mean to sit at a national table where policy was shaped. But the third half, the part he never used to count before, was here in this house, in the everyday moments that had become his anchor. It was Thursday evening when the fracture line appeared. He had just finished a late dinner with Elena and the twins when his phone buzzed on the table. It was Lena. You need to see this, she said, her voice tight. The hedge fund's back. Not for Aurora this time. For you, they've hired a private investigations firm. And the story they're building, it's aimed at Elena. Adrian's jaw clenched. What kind of story? They're painting her as a manipulator who used a foundation to get close to you, implying she diverted funds for personal use. It's garbage, but they have documents, fabricated, I'm sure, and they've leaked enough to get reporters interested. He glanced toward the kitchen, where Elena was laughing with the girls over dessert. How long before it breaks? He asked. Could be hours. By morning, it was everywhere. Headlines couched in questions. Did Aurora CEO's partner misuse funds? Accompanied by blurry photos of Elena leaving the art center. The girls' school called to inform her that photographers had been spotted near the playground. Elena's face was pale but steady. We knew they'd come after us eventually, she said. Not like this, Adrian replied. This isn't just noise. It's targeted character assassination. The easy option was clear. Take the Washington offer, step away from Aurora, and let the storm die on its own. Without him as a target, the hedge fund would lose interest. But the cost was equally clear. He would be leaving Aurora and Elena to fend for themselves. That night, Senator Hale called again. "I saw the news," Hale said. "I don't know the truth of it, and frankly, I don't care. What I care about is this. Opportunities like the council don't wait. I can protect you from this kind of nonsense if you're under my wing in D.C. Adrian didn't answer right away. "Think carefully, Cole," Hale added. "You can't fight every battle. Sometimes the smartest move is to step off the field before you're carried off." But the next morning, Adrian drove straight to the art center. The building was quiet. Classes had been canceled because of the media swarm. He found Elena in her office, surrounded by stacks of lesson plans she was trying to organize. "I can make this stop," he said. "If I take the D.C. job, the heat goes away. They'll move on." She looked up at him, her eyes searching. "And what happens to everything we've built here? What happens to Aurora? To us?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Then decide what matters most," she said. That afternoon, Lena brought him a folder. Inside were the results of a private counterinvestigation Adrian had ordered overnight. It contained proof the hedge fund had manufactured the allegations, emails, payment records, even a list of journalists they'd approached. "This could bury them," Lena said, "if you go public with it." "But if I do, it becomes a full-scale war," Adrian replied. "Every skeleton, every rumor, they'll throw it all. Then the question is," Lena said quietly, "are you willing to stand in the fire?" That evening, Adrian returned to Albatross Lane. The girls were in the living room, building a blanket fort. Elena was at the kitchen counter, sorting through mail. He stood there for a moment, watching them, the noise of the day receding just enough for him to hear his own heartbeat. And that was when he knew he wasn't going to D.C. He wasn't walking away. If the fight had to get uglier, so be it. But he wasn't leaving Elena and the twins to face it alone. Not now, not ever. The next morning, Adrian called a press conference. Cameras crowded the Aurora atrium again, reporters leaning forward like they could smell blood. "The allegations against Elena Ramirez are false," he said, voice steady. "And I can prove it." He laid out the evidence in clear, precise terms, naming the hedge fund and its tactics. By the time he finished, the story had shifted from scandal to scandal exposed. But Adrian knew this wasn't the end. It was only the moment the lines in the sand became visible to everyone. He had chosen his side. And now there was no going back. The days following Adrian's press conference were a storm, fast-moving, chaotic, and dangerous for anyone caught in its path. The hedge fund denials came quickly, but they were clumsy. Too many of their fingerprints were on the forged documents Adrian had revealed. Within 48 hours, the state attorney general's office announced an inquiry into their practices. By the end of the week, their stock had dropped 12%. Aurora's own shares, in contrast, climbed. The board, many of whom had been wary of Adrian's new direction, now publicly praised his leadership for defending corporate integrity. But the real victory wasn't in the market numbers. It was in the quiet moment 2 days later, when Elena walked into the art center for the first time since the smear campaign began and was met not with cameras, but with applause from the staff and students. She called Adrian that night. "It's over," she said, "at least this part." For the first time in months, the house on Albatross Lane felt normal again. The twins went back to school without reporters lurking nearby. They started planning a spring break trip, a modest beach vacation that, to them, felt like winning the lottery. But Adrian knew the Washington offer still lingered, unspoken but not forgotten. Hale hadn't called since the press conference, but the option was still there. And every so often, he'd catch Elena watching him with that half-question in her eyes. One evening, a week after the dust had settled, Adrian took Elena out to dinner. Not a public gala or a working meal, but a small Italian place tucked into a side street where no one knew them. Over pasta and wine, he finally said it. "I'm not taking the D.C. job." She set down her fork. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," he said. "I thought it was about scale, how much impact I could have. But I've realized something. The scale doesn't matter if you lose the reason you started. And my reason is here. Her eyes softened. You could have both, you know. Some people manage it. Maybe, he said, but I know myself. I'd end up chasing the bigger stage until there was nothing left of this. She reached across the table and took his hand. Then you made the right choice. The next few months passed in a rhythm Adrian had almost forgotten existed. Steady, predictable, even quiet. Aurora's project expanded. The art center thrived, and the solar partnership broke ground on its largest installation yet. Adrian kept showing up for soccer games, science fairs, and impromptu living room concerts. He still wore suits, still closed deals, still commanded rooms. But he also learned to braid hair without tangling it and could now identify every single character in Tessa's favorite cartoon. On the first warm evening of spring, they had dinner in the backyard, grilled chicken, fresh bread, and lemonade the twins had made themselves. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jules asked, "Are you going to be our dad forever now?" The question was so direct it caught Adrian off guard. He glanced at Elena, who smiled faintly but didn't intervene. "Yes," he said simply, "if that's what you want." Tess nodded like it was obvious. "We already decided." Elena's hand brushes under the table, and in that small, wordless gesture, he felt the truth of it. They were already a family. Titles didn't matter. Weeks later, on the anniversary of the Art Center's opening, Adrian stood on its stage again. This time, he wasn't defending himself or his company. He was announcing a new fund, jointly managed by Aurora and the Center, that would provide grants to community programs across the country. In the front row, Elena and the twins watched, beaming. When the applause rose, he didn't see an audience. He saw the life he'd chosen. The war for Aurora had made him a fighter again. But this, standing here, surrounded by the people and the work that gave his fight meaning, this had made him whole. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Cole knew that he didn't need a bigger stage. He had everything he wanted right here.